Hey guys, and welcome back. Pull out those N64 controllers because it's time for another Legend of Zelda throwback. For today's project, I'll be sculpting a Deku scrub. I began by crumpling up some aluminum foil and covering that with an even layer of regular Sculpey. I played around with it until I had the basic shape of the body as well as the head. Next, I rolled up a bit more Sculpey and started working on the mouth. Using a ballpoint stylus, I pressed that into the Sculpey to make this round little snout. After that, I carved out 2 holes for the eyes and anchored those down into place. Now, it took a bit of finessing to get the right expression, but after I made the angle of the eyebrows a little bit steeper, he was starting to look like a Deku scrub. Regular Sculpey is very soft and easy to work with, whereas this gray Super Sculpey I used for the eyes is a lot more firm. I use these materials on purpose so I can easily blend the regular Sculpey without damaging the eyes. Next, I started adding in some details to the mouth. Last summer, I made a really cool full-scale Deku mask replica. For that project, I tried to make the mouth look like it was made out of actual tree bark, so I decided to do the same with this Deku scrub. Once that was complete, it still needed some smaller details to make it more interesting to look at. So I rolled up some smaller bits of clay and pressed those onto the surface to make some spots. Following that, I used my stylus to etch in as much detail as possible. Essentially, the more texture you can put into your sculpture now, the easier it's going to be to paint later. That was all starting to come together pretty well, which means it's time to begin building the base. The Deku scrub is going to be popping up through a flower, so I attached him to the rim of the base and started building out the main shapes where the petals will be attached. Now, I cut out a bunch of different sized petals for the flower, but some of them turned out to be a little bit too small. So instead, I decided to use those for the leaves that are going to go on top of his head. It was a little bit tricky figuring out the best way to layer in all these different leaves, but after playing around with some different configurations, I got them looking the way I want and anchored all of those down into place. After looking at some reference photos, I realized there's a couple more leaves that are actually supposed to be facing upwards. I inserted those with some aluminum wire for some extra support and attached everything together. After that, I placed the flower petals onto the base and made sure to texture those as well. At this point, I'm really happy with how everything came together, so it's time to put the Sculpey into the oven and bake it all for 45 minutes. Once the clay was cool enough to touch, I applied some glue and attached it onto the display base. The base was a bit larger than the sculpt itself, so I decided to add a few little pebbles and rocks to hide the flat wooden surface. Using some matte black paint, I did 2 even coats to cover the base, and also made sure to attach some rubber pads onto the bottom so it doesn't scratch my display shelf. Now, unfortunately, part of the sculpt itself actually cracked while it was baking in the oven. There's a little bit of a seam between the Deku scrub and the flower, so I filled that in with some craft glue. It dries clear, which means it's still visible right now, but once I start painting, that won't be an issue. Next, I applied 2 coats of brown to the entire sculpture for a base coat. The color choice kind of threw me off a little bit because the leaves are actually the part that remains brown, and instead the bark and skin texture is what gets all the green highlights. I applied a little bit around his mouth and a little bit more on his stomach. After that, I painted on some yellow for the eyes and added in some contrast around the edges with some red and a little bit of orange. For some additional shadows, I darkened his upper face so the eyes can really stand out. I also went back and added some subtle green highlights onto the edges of the leaves to help blend everything together. I was liking the way the face was looking, but made sure to water down some black paint, and using a thin brush cleaned up the edge on his eyes so the expression is just right. Next, I applied a really bright shade of green onto all of those little spots. This Deku scrub is almost done, but I still had to finish the base. I applied a black wash to the rocky areas, as well as some gray and silver onto the stones. Now, most Deku scrubs in the game have a brown base flower. I decided to go with a pink color instead, just as a little reference to the flowers that you see in Majora's mask. And just like that, this Deku scrub is complete. I'm really happy with how it all turned out, super excited to add this to the collection, but as always, if you have any suggestions of what you'd like to see me create next, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching.